When it comes to Skylands itself and all the elements that exist within it, I think that one of the weirdest yet most fascinating out of all of them has to be the magic element, especially when compared to the more traditional elements. The closest element that has the same weirdness and maybe a little bit more is the tech element, but that's not because it doesn't make sense, it's because I'm not sure what counts for that element and what doesn't. The reason why the magic element itself is so weird to me is that literally all of the other elements could exist within it. Yes, they all have to have the pretense of being magical to some extent, but just look at how diverse it is. It's the same element for an alien from another world, a potion maker who uses his concoctions to turn into a monster, a fawn painter who taught herself how to fight and create paint creatures, and whatever cursed anomaly Wrecking Ball is supposed to be. But that doesn't mean that some of these Skylanders don't share something that can link them together. There's a lot of magicians, illusionists, and most importantly for today, shamans, part of the magic element. Once again, this is another video topic that I picked out from the comment section, and once again, it's from Kid with Cat, who suggested that I do Double Trouble, Voodood, and Zulu, the furry hog rider himself. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at some of Skyland's shamans and Voodood, since he isn't really a shaman, just a former tribe leader. So with all of that said and done, let's get started! Now, when it comes to Double Trouble, he's one of those weird Skylanders with a kinda strange design. Not because it's bad, in actuality it's pretty good for somehow making all of those colors work, but his face being a tiki mask the way it is kinda makes it look uncanny to me. It doesn't look as weird as I'm making it out to be, but it is pretty strange. The more that I look at it and the more that I think about it, the more that I question if his face is made of wood. Like, that's his actual face, the eyes blink, his mouth moves, and he can do all sorts of other stuff. I know now would be the obvious time to talk about the biggest elephant in the room regarding him, but for now let's just take a look at his backstory and see what we can learn about him. Before Double Trouble was a Skylander, he used to be a skilled shaman who lived by himself in one of Skyland's many tropical rainforests, where he would forage for exotic fruits and rare roots to use in potion making. On one expedition, he went out to search for a plant known as the Whispering Water Lily, a rare fruit that was said to multiply the power of any magical spell, and when he found the plant, he was so excited that he swallowed it whole and performed the spell immediately. The second he performed his spell, he would hear 3 popping noises only for 3 tinier copies of him to appear out of nowhere. As it turned out, he had somewhat misunderstood how the lily worked and what exactly it would multiply. Luckily for him, the clones were not really a nuisance. In fact, they were the opposite. They were charming, clever, and somewhat cute. Somehow. Which is something that the shaman desperately needed in his isolation, but they would have one major flaw. They would always explode on contact, but Double Trouble really wouldn't have a problem with that, and neither would Eon. Eon would eventually learn about Double Trouble and his clones, and even though we don't know how they met, Eon would still go out of his way to make Double Trouble a Skylander, and he would play a role in Lightning Rod Faces the Cyclops Queen, and interestingly enough, the backstory of another Skylander, but I'll leave that as a surprise for a later time. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm starting to prefer these more personal stories for Skylanders' backstories instead of the usual where they just fight a bad guy and then they just become a Skylander after that. Yes, it's a pretty simple way to show off a Skylander's abilities, and there's still a lot of stuff going on, but still, it would be nice to somewhat have their actions play more into how the story unfolds. But with that being said, let's actually talk about him. Now, when it comes to him specifically, the biggest question that I have is how does his clones exactly work? The way that they're described makes me think that they are sentient with their own personalities, but that just raises another question. Do they die when they explode and he just makes new ones, or are they kinda just revived? It would be pretty tragic if these clones just explode and that's just it for them. And that just makes me wonder how Double Trouble feels about all of this. He saw these clones as his companions when he was on his own in the jungle, so I have a feeling that they may be the same clones and not just different clones, since I don't think that Double Trouble would just throw what he saw as his only friends at enemies like they're kamikazes. But with that out the way, I think it's about time that we get into the next Skylander of today.
Asks first, questions later.
Now, when it comes to Voodood, he's not only one of the most thematically different Skylanders from SSA, but he's also one of the most thematically different when it comes to the Forgotten 8, which he's also a part of. I don't know why, but he just looks extremely off when you compare him to other Skylanders, and to be 100% honest with you all, I think this is one of those designs that I don't really jive with that much. I also figured out while I was writing this that he technically isn't a shaman. He's a warrior with a magical staff, and that's kinda weird to me. His name, Voodood, is a pun for voodoo, so I thought there would be more of a connection to it than just his name. But that's enough stalling for now. Let's actually get into his backstory and start to break things down, because oh boy, this is a lot. Voodood hails from a tribe of orcs known as the Ugo Warriors, and they were once the most revered tribes in all of Skylands. And even though they were viewed as one of the best by the rest of the world, they were haunted by a threat that they struggled to fight against. Every night, wild dragons would circle their tribe, and every warrior caught outside of their homes or any form of shelter went missing, presumed to be eaten by the dragons, and the only hope that they really had to stop this was a weapon known as the legendary Axe Reaver. The Axe Reaver was the only weapon that the orcs could really use to destroy the dragons and keep themselves safe once and for all, but unfortunately for them, the axe was lost and they had no clue where to find it, and at this point, this is where Voodood comes into the story. Even though the dragons were basically undefeatable, the Ugo orcs had the reputation of being the fiercest fighting force around, and any orc who wanted to sign up for their force first had to retrieve a pebble deep within a cave known as the Trouser-Weddingly Terrifying Cave of Trials, which not only doubled as a recruitment strategy, but also served as a rite of passage for any young orc, and one of the orcs that wanted to become a warrior was Voodood. He went down into the depths of the cave in an attempt to search for a pebble that he could claim, before suddenly, a beam of light appeared ahead of him, and after he followed it, he would enter a chamber that contained the skeleton of an enormous dragon, and in the place of the dragon's heart, laid a gleaming gem with the Axe Reaver embedded into it. After finding this at the bottom of the cave, Voodood realized that the axe and dragon skull would be far better to bring back than a measly pebble, so he would do exactly that, fancying the dragon skull into a helmet/hat thing before returning home. And once he did, the Ugo folk promptly made him their leader. He would go on to protect his home from a few other unspecified threats and dangers, becoming a hero revered by his people, but one day, a new threat would arise unlike any that they had ever seen before. The darkness. The entire tribe led by Voodood marched to face this new threat, but this would be a fatal mistake that would cost his entire tribe. We don't know if it was his strength, the axe's magic protecting him, or just blind luck, but Voodood would be the only member of his tribe to walk away from that fight still breathing, effectively making him the last of it. At this point, he had nothing really left to fight for, and nowhere to go, and even though we don't know how he became aware of the Skylanders and why he joined them, he would turn to them and eventually go on to become a member of Buzz's elite team of Skylanders, and he would go on to make an appearance in Secret Agent Secrets. And oh my god, there is so much to break down. Now, something that I've noticed in this backstory and a lot of the others from Skylanders from SSA is that they are all somewhat more mature and fleshed out, and I think that Voodood's is the best example. They don't shy away from death in this one. They straight up imply that the dragon in the cave was killed by the last holder of the Axe Reaver, and the tribe was picked off by dragons before being wiped out completely by the darkness itself. And if this wasn't a kids franchise, Voodood would be racked with PTSD. I think the reason why this is so brutal is because Voodood might have been an earlier Skylander when Spyro's adventure was originally Spyro's kingdom. This would make a lot of sense since Ghost Roaster was also a Skylander that was meant for Spyro's kingdom, and Ghost Roaster slaughtered a town of ghosts. Since his design is pretty villainous look-wise, and it barely changed from the design that we saw in that Spyro's kingdom screenshot, maybe his backstory stayed the same as well and was elaborated on in the future. It could have also been tweaked to make him fit as a Skylander as well. I mean, this game would have come out after The Legend of Spyro Dawn of the Dragon, and from what I know about the Legend games, they were apparently known for having a darker tone than the Spyro games that came before. But right now, I'm only spitballing theories around, so take all of this with a dose of salt. Speaking of the dragons, I'm kinda wondering what exactly happened to them. I want to believe that they were set packing, but due to the nature of his story being downright brutal at times compared to most others, how the Axe Reaver is described as destroying the dragons instead of something like defeating them, and the fact that the dragon threat completely vanishes and is never brought up again, it makes me think that they were just slaughtered or at least lost a few before deciding to leave the village alone. There's also that excerpt in his personality section that explains that he has to tell people that he has a heart of gold due to the ogre's bad reputation, but I'd take this one with a grain of salt since this could just be for the ogres as a whole and not just his tribe. This also kind of backs up my theory that the Skylanders' backstories are actually written by someone because it doesn't bring this up even though it's a massive aspect of his backstory. And speaking of which, this makes me wonder how the other Skylanders view the no-kill rule. Now, I know that is explained why they have it in a book somewhere, but I wonder if the Skylanders have their own interpretations of this rule. It would be really interesting to explore because, to be completely honest with you, I don't think that we can't kill or we will just become as bad as them would suffice for all of the Skylanders as their reason why. It could maybe be following the group's rules for some, maybe personal experience from others, maybe a bunch see it as a line that keep them in check, but I personally think that the rule would evolve into something left up to interpretation, especially for grayer Skylanders and as more of them come into the fold, since this rule has existed since before SSA. But with that out the way, let's get into the last Skylander of today. Now, when it comes to my knowledge about Zulu prior to this video, I only really knew him through his soul gem like most of the other cores from SWAT Force, but what's interesting is that I also know him through another thing as well: Hog Rider. Now, I don't exactly remember where I heard this, but Hog Rider and Zulu were compared to each other due to the fact that they both ride a hog. Zulu riding one made of magic, while Hog Rider rides one that's normal. But with all of that said and done, let's get into his backstory. Before Zulu was a Skylander, he was a bear shaman with the heart of a warrior, along with being the descendant of a long line of shamans, and because of this, he would travel far and wide across Skylands to find the 7 strange strongholds. The 7 strange strongholds are ancient, mysterious sites of great wonder in Skylands, and when he made it to them, he would begin to study the wisdom and fighting styles of the 7 strange mages. After many long years of studying, training, and traveling, he would eventually learn how to summon animals to fight at his side, and once he was finished, he decided that it was time for him to return home, only to find it in the grasp of turmoil. His sacred homeland was invaded by an army of trolls, hoping that they could mine up its natural magical resources. And when he saw this, he flew into a rage. He beat them so badly that his backstory describes it as the beating of their lives, freeing his lands from the trolls' operations single-handedly. His actions would eventually catch the attention of Double Trouble. I told you he'd make an appearance later, and seeing him as a potential Skylander, he would bring him to Master Eon, and he would go on to become a Skylander from there, and he would also make an appearance in Stump Smash Face the Bone Dragon, which I won't talk about here since 1, it's pretty damn small, all things considered, and 2, to properly explain what's going on, I'm going to have to explain a pretty massive spoiler, and I don't think it's really worth it. Now, the biggest question that I really have when it comes to Zulu is why is he aligned with the life element and not the magic element? I mean, it could have been some development reasons, but I'm talking about the lore reasons. He fits way better as a magic Skylander than anything, and that's what his backstory is kind of agreeing on as well. Is it because he summons animals and that's the reason why? And speaking of which, I don't think I've ever seen or remember any of the backstories describing a fight as the beating of a lifetime. So it's safe to assume that he straight up gave the trolls an Arkham beatdown with the animal summons. But with all of that said and done, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow the channel, go check out the playlist for the series along with the music in the description down below, and I will see you all in the next one.